A Turma was a cavalry squadron in the Roman army of the Republican Empire. In the Byzantine Empire, it became applied to the larger, regiment-sized military administrative divisions of a Turma. Roman army. Republic in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, the time of the Punic Wars and Rome's expansion into Spain and Greece. The core of the Roman army was formed by citizens, augmented by contingents from Rome's allies. The organization of the Roman legion of the period is described by the Greek historian Polybius, who writes that each 4,200-strong infantry legion was accompanied by 300 citizen cavalry. This contingent was divided into 10 Turma. According to Polybius, the squadron members would elect as their officers 3 decuriones, of whom the first to be chosen would act as the squadron's commander and the other 2 as his deputies. As in earlier times, these men were drawn from among the 18th century of the equestrian order, the wealthiest classes of the Roman people, who could afford to provide for the horse and its equipment themselves. Empire. With the reorganization of the army under Emperor Augustus and his successors, the Turma became the basic subunit of the cavalry, the rough equivalent of the infantry centuria, both in the auxiliaries, who formed the bulk of the Roman cavalry, and in the legionary cavalry detachments. The auxiliary cohors equitata was a mixed unit combining infantry and cavalry, and existed in 2 types. The cohors equitata quingenaria, with an infantry cohort of 480 men and 4 Turma of cavalry, and the reinforced cohors equitata miliaria, with 800 infantry and 8 Turma. Likewise, the purely cavalry alley contained either 16 or 24 Turma. Individual Turma of camel riders also appear among cohortes equitata in the Middle East, and Emperor Trajan established the first all-camel cavalry unit, the Aelari Alpia Dromedariorum Parmarinorum. The Turma was still commanded by a decurio, aided by 2 subaltern principalus, a sesquiplicarius and a duplicarius, as well as a signifer or vexillarius. These ranks corresponded respectively with the infantry's tesserarius, optio, and signifer. The exact size of the Turma under the Principate, however, is unclear. 30 men was the norm in the Republican army and apparently in the cohortes equitata, but not for the alley. The De Munitionibus Castrorum, for instance, records that a cohors equitata miliaria numbered exactly 240 troopers, i.e., 30 men per Turma, but also gives the number of horses for the ala miliaria, composed of 24 Turma, at 1,000. If one subtracts the extra horses of the officers, one is left with 832 horses, which does not divide evenly with 24. At the same time, Arrian explicitly says that the ala quingenaria counted 512 men, suggesting a size of 32 men for each Turma. As for the legions, during the Principate, each had a cavalry contingent organized in 4 Turma. A legionary Turma was led by a centurion, assisted by an optio and a vexillarius as senior principalus. Each of them led a file of 10 troopers, for a grand total of 132 horsemen in each legion. Their status was distinctly inferior to that of the legionary infantry. The centurions and principalus of the legionary Turma were classed as supernumerae, and although their men were included in the legionary cohort lists, they camped separately from them. In the late Roman army, the Turma and its structure were retained, with changes in titulature only. The Turma was still headed by a decurio, who also led the first 10-strong file, while the other 2 files were led by subaltern cataphractii. In essence, the successors of the early empires duplicae and sesquiplicae. Traces of this structure also apparently survived in the 6th century East Roman army. In the late 6th century strategikon of Maurice, the cavalry files are led by a dekakos. Byzantine Empire. In the 7th century, as a result of the crisis caused by the Muslim conquests, the Byzantine military and administrative system was reformed. The old late Roman division between military and civil administration was abandoned. and the remains of the East Roman army's field armies were settled in great districts, the themata, that were named after them. The term Turma, in its Greek transcription Turma, reappears at that time as the major subdivision of a Tama. The army of each Tama was divided into 2 to 4 Turmae, and each Turma further into a number of morai or drungoi, which in turn were composed of several banda. This division was carried through to the territorial administration of each Tama. Turmae and banda were identified with clearly defined districts which served as their garrison and recruitment areas. In his Tactica, Emperor Leo VI the Wise presents an idealized Tama as consisting of 3 Turmae, each divided into 3 drungoi, etc. This picture, however, is misleading, as the sources do not support any degree of uniformity in size or number of subdivisions in the different themata, nor indeed an exact correspondence of the territorial with the tactical divisions. Depending on the tactical exigencies, smaller administrative Turmae could be joined together on campaign and larger ones broken up. Since the elementary unit, the bandan, could itself number between 200 and 400 men, the Turma too could reach up to 6,000 men, although 2,000–5,000 seems to have been the norm between the 7th and early 10th centuries. Each Turma was usually headed by a Turma eshes. In some cases, however, an ekprasophor, a temporary representative of the governing strategos of each Tama, could be appointed instead. The title first appears in circa 626, when a certain George was Turma eshes of the Armenia Koi. The Turma eshes was usually based in a fortress town. Aside from his military responsibilities, he exercised fiscal and judicial duties in the area under his control. In the lists of officers and seals, Turma eshai usually hold the ranks of spatharo candidatus, spartharios or candidatus. In function and rank, the Turma eshes corresponded with the topatarites of the professional imperial tagmata regiments. The Turma eshai were paid according to the importance of their Tama. Those of the more prestigious Anatolian themes received 216 gold numismata annually, while those of the European themes received 144 numismata. The same amount paid to the drungarioi and the other senior officers of the Tama. In some sources, the earlier term Maraches, which occupied a similar hierarchical position in the 6th–7th centuries, is used interchangeably with Turma eshes. In the 9th–10th centuries, it is often found in the variant form Meriarches. It has, however, also been suggested by scholars like John B. Berry and John Halden that the latter was a distinct post, held by the Turma eshes attached to the governing strategos of each Tama and residing at the thematic capital. In the mid-10th century, the average size of most units fell. In the case of the Turma, it dropped from 2,000–3,000 men to 1,000 men and less, in essence to the level of the earlier drungos. Although larger Turmae are still recorded, it is probably no coincidence that the term drungos disappears from use at around that time. Consequently, the Turma was divided directly into 5 to 7 banda, each of 50 to 100 cavalry or 200 to 400 infantry. The term Turma itself fell gradually into disuse in the 11th century, but survived at least until the end of the 12th century as an administrative term. Turma eshai are still attested in the first half of the 11th century, but the title seems to have fallen out of use thereafter.